Officially announced on the 23rd of December 2019, Jake Paul and AnEsonGib confirmed their professional boxing debuts for the 30th of January 2020. Hosted at the 10,000-seater Meridian at Island Gardens Stadium in Miami, Paul vs Gib was broadcasted on subscription-based streaming services DAZN and Sky Sports. Although the bout involved two individuals best renowned for their internet stardom rather than their boxing ability, no financial information has been leaked online. While fight person split and gate and stream numbers would have confirmed the event's success, Paul's inclusion on the Mike Tyson vs Roy Jones Jr. undercard for the 20th of November 2020 evidences his box office appeal. The most likely culprit behind the information blackout is Eddie Hearn, managing director and promoter of Matchroom Sport Boxing, and the overseer of the Paul Gib proceedings. Son of snooker, darts, pool and tenpin bowling promoter Barry Hearn, Eddie was thrown into the deep end of boxing promotion. Fumbling together his first show, a heavyweight headliner between David Haye and Audley Harrison, Hearn entered boxing as a result of an impromptu meeting with Harrison at a poker game. Disregarding the snooze fest that the fight was, Hearn had smashed the financial operations out of the park. Not only had Hearn managed to secure Matchroom Boxing as the exclusive provider of boxing on Sky Sports, he had also managed to flog 223,000 pay-per-view buys. Better yet, Hearn's bolstered reputation led to him signing top British contenders, including Darren Barker and Kell Brook, as well as the prized scalp of middleweight world champion Carl Froch. With a growing stable of quality fighters, Hearn had sparked the embers of a boxing renaissance. Just 4 years after Haye Harrison, Hearn masterminded the build-up to the hotly anticipated Carl Froch and George Groves Super Middleweight World Championship rematch for the 31st of May 2014. Shattering the previous post-World War II British attendance record of 55,000 held by Ricky Hatton from 2008, Froch Groves 2 crammed 80,000 fans into Wembley Stadium, selling 900,000 pay-per-views and generating over £22 million revenue. Froch Groves 2 officially propelled British boxing back into the public sphere. Hearn had managed to force boxing back into the mainstream through the simplest of formulas. In its most distilled form, the formula follows. Recruit a roster of media-friendly and stylistically exciting fighters that appeal to a casual audience. At the start, you're forced to milk the potential from the scraps of your roster, for example the heavyweight flop that was Audley Harrison and the British middleweight Darren Barker. But eventually, as you've built up your reputation, you can move on to more surefire stars, Olympic gold medalist Anthony Joshua, middleweight great Gennady Golovkin and future Women's Hall of Famer Katie Taylor. Host regular boxing events across home soil to create a loyal domestic market. Start by regularly hosting events at classic small British venues such as York Hall and Wembley Arena to win over the hardcore boxing crowd. Eventually you can move on to the big boy stadiums, Millennium Stadium and Wembley Stadium, once the roster has that name value that resonates with a casual audience. Finally, make boxing easily accessible for the casual audience. Stream events to mainstream broadcasters such as Sky Sports, whilst also using social media such as Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, as well as using your press-trained boxers to build up hype for events. Boxing fans can thank Hearn for his vital role in dragging the sport into the 21st century. Competitors have since been forced to match the quality produced by Matchroom or risk falling to the wayside. Frank Warren and his Queensberry Promotions, the UK boxing kingpin throughout the 80s and noughties, hosting Prince Naseem Hamed, Ricky Hatton and Amir Khan, speedily aligned itself with rival major broadcaster BT Sports in direct competition with the Matchroom Sky relationship. With Matchroom and Queensberry both opting to broadcast the same number of 20 live British events a year, the fervent televising of top quality boxing has only enhanced the reputation of the sport rather than oversaturate the market. As of 2020, Hearn is a widely respected name within the boxing industry. A shrewd businessman, after spying the dollar signs circling KSI and Logan Paul, he stepped in to organise the hotly anticipated rematch. Adding a much needed level of professionalism, KSI and Logan Paul 2 was a smash hit despite the lack of financial figures emerging from the event. Hearn secured the official sanctioning from CSAC, California State Athletic Commission, and held press conferences across the UK and US. Moreover, Hearn's presence led to the heavyweight trinity, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, and many other professionals giving the fight their blessing. Hearn had officially elevated the state of celebrity boxing before the fight had even taken place in the ring. Although later telling Boxing Scene in November 2019, the Logan Paul vs KSI is a one-off, Just 1 month later, Hearn had announced the next celebrity showdown, Jake Paul vs AnEsonGib. For Hearn to risk his pure boxing stature by pandering to celebrity fights that hardcore boxing fans vehemently oppose as circus shows, illuminates not just the potential profits, but more importantly, the future of the sport. Possessing the media know-how and logistical experience to turn these circus shows into a lucrative reality, get comfortable seeing Eddie pictured alongside your favourite influencer. Returning to the Playboys, both AnEsonGib and Jake Paul held typical professional training camps before their fight on the 30th of January 2020. Gib, who started his camp in early November, enlisted the tutelage of professional cruiserweight Vidal Riley. Successful with training celebrities, Riley had proved his coaching worth when he successfully guided KSI to a split decision victory over Logan Paul during their heated rematch. Fashioned on modern principles, Riley constructed a training camp that balanced strength and conditioning, technique, mechanics, and regular sparring. Exploring the footage released by Gib's camp highlights major red flags that would later prove fateful in Miami. In a video released just 4 days before the fight, there is a genuine concern amongst Gib's coaches that he was failing to deliver shots with necessary power. Strength and conditioning coach Leon Williams noted that right now we are finding that Gib hasn't got enough power behind his shots. Later in the video, Williams identifies the cause as inefficient mechanics. Basic techniques are an issue that should have been ironed out long before any training camp. Although Riley justifies working on Gib's mechanics during camp as the same training found in professional camps, it must be noted that Gib was learning the mechanics from scratch while pros instead rehearse or refine. Beyond the boxing itself, Gib had to face an intense spotlight from an industry alien to him. There was no escape for Gib, as he was constantly reminded of the scale of the event with advertising, touring for press conferences, and adjusting to the hardships of camp life. The cumulative pressure will no doubt have chipped away at Gib's mental gradually, and as a result, his physical performance on the night. Conversely, Paul isolated himself from the media limelight and trained at Shane Mosley's gym in the mountains of Big Bear, California. Creating time for boxing away from the distractions of a social media star, Paul was able to solely focus on honing his skills and mentally preparing for the upcoming fight. Hall of Fame boxer turned trainer Shane Mosley proved to be another string to Paul's bow. Mosley's reason for aligning with Paul may have been because his children enjoy the social media star, but there is no doubting the expertise that Mosley offered. An exceptionally successful fighter, Sugar Shane held world titles in 3 weight classes, lightweight, welterweight and light middleweight, and secured the scalps of many contemporary greats, Oscar De La Hoya twice, John Molina, and Antonio Margarito. While it is common that a successful career as a professional boxer more often than not fails to translate into a successful coaching career, Mosley would prove himself an exception. Mosley was able to develop the already impressive jab of Paul, as well as drill him on operating under the spotlights. Most crucial, Mosley's guardianship enabled Paul access to the training facilities at Big Bear. Hidden away in the San Bernardino Mountains, Big Bear is a renowned altitude training facility where many world-class boxers have trained before, including Gennady Golovkin and Tyson Fury. The workload involved in Gib's and Paul's training camps were largely the same: strength and conditioning, technique, mechanics, with one exception: sparring partners. Clocking up rounds with quality professional boxers clearly displayed the difference between Gib and Paul on fight night. While the former looked ungainly inside the ring, the latter was able to fluidly move through the motions, having already fine-tuned his skills in a competitive setting. Mosley revealed to Seconds Out Boxing that Paul had been sparring with Ukrainian super welterweight Serhii Bohachuk. Mosley later admitted that although Serhii hit him with some really hard shots, he was gaining his respect. Even after considering Mosley's words with a pinch of salt, Paul still spent considerable time learning from a similarly aged, 25-year-old, unbeaten contender around the top 25 of the super welterweight division. The most decisive part of the fight occurred before the timer had even loaded onto the screen. Within the first few seconds of the fight, Gib revealed his game plan as he immediately raced across the canvas to control the centre of the ring and pressure Paul onto his back foot. Riley's game plan was clearly designed to stop Paul from settling into a comfortable mid-range and utilising his 10-inch reach advantage. Employing unorthodox herky-jerky movement, Gib applied forward pressure by dipping at the knees to change levels and avoid incoming straight shots. Despite successfully avoiding the initial triple jab thrown by Paul, Gibb's explosive movement burned considerable energy, while also preventing effective countershots from range. This is not to say that Gibb's aggressive movement was a poor strategic choice. Paul's first meaningful shot of the match, a dangerous right hook, breezed over Gibb's head as a result of his active level changing. Furthermore, having backed Paul into the corner with forward pressure, Gibb was able to capitalise with a counter hook. Gibb's offensive style resembled heavyweight great Joe Frazier. Aiming to get inside an opponent's range by bobbing and weaving, Gibb made himself a moving target that was hard to hit. Two issues with using Frazier's strategy would become apparent later in the fight, however. Number 1. Gibb is not the athletic freak that Frazier was. Constant movement drains the gas tank and takes the sting out of punches, a lack of power already being a key issue identified pre-fight. Number 2. Gibb's one-dimensional defense, simply dipping low, was not compatible with his robotic footwork. After Paul read Gibb's defense and adjusted the angle of his shots to hit a crouched Gibb, Gibb was left rooted. Gibb desperately needed another defensive layer, whether that be slipping or parrying, to cause Paul problems when countering. Gibb's defensive frailties were exposed in the very next punch of the bout. Having just missed with his right hook, Paul made the immediate, necessary adjustments to arc his next right hook so it connected as Gibb rose out of his crouch stance. Although cleanly connecting to the side of the head, Paul wasn't able to deliver much juice to the punch. Gibb's offensive momentum had saved him, having pushed Paul's weight onto his left leg, leaving his right leg limply extended behind him. Unable to plant this right foot, Paul was thus incapable of generating the necessary torque to powerfully throw his right hand. It would still take Paul the full minute of the first round to become comfortable with Gibb's changing levels. Paul found difficulty in landing his ramrod jab with its usual frequency. Often sailing harmlessly over the head of Gibb, Paul attempted to change strategy and meet Gibb at his own level. Using a double jab, Paul initially missed the first shot as Gibb ducked underneath it. Paul's second jab, however, exhibited his ability to adjust on the fly, dipping to meet Gibb. Unfortunately for Paul, the second jab would also miss. Even if the shot had landed, Paul would have been unable to generate power from such a position as his hips were firmly set. Regardless, the boxing awareness and adjustments shown by Paul, a two-fight novice, is pleasing to see for his future potential. Riley's tactics were once again on show as Gibb's forward pressure aimed to break the footwork of Paul and keep his back against the ropes. Robotic footwork, to be sure, but Gibb's movement is enough to push Paul back without needing to throw shots or feint. Gibb's downfall, however, was his inability to cut off the ring effectively. Once Gibb had Paul in a dangerous situation, backed into the corner of the ring, Gibb wasted his opportunity by refusing to throw. Without facing any danger, Paul was able to throw a loose shot which Gibb bit on and opened up Paul's exit out of the side. In pursuit, Gibb failed to move laterally and cut off Paul's exit. Instead, Gibb opted to follow Paul in a straight line and as such lost his hard-earned pressure in a matter of seconds. Having experienced the full extent of Gibb's defensive capabilities, Paul began to plant his feet and throw with more confidence after the first minute. Using his jab as a rangefinder to meet the dipping Gibb and to hold his moving target in place, Paul followed up with a right straight that sailed through the centre of Gibb's leaky high guard. Gibb was attempting to execute too much at once for a novice. While Gibb continued to apply forward pressure, he was also wildly feinting, but never committing to a single shot. As a result, all Paul had to do was continue moving backwards before picking his counter shot. The downside of Gibb's defence are obvious when Gibb is sent reeling across the ring from a basic jab. Having dipped down preemptively, Gibb had spread his feet too far apart, leaving himself unbalanced. Moreover, Gibb found himself facing Paul face on, and left himself with little natural resistance to any force he would receive. While Gibb only absorbed a tame jab, the shot alone was almost enough to knock him down on the mat for the first time. The first knockdown of the fight highlighted the levels that separate both men. At a mid-range, Paul remained calm and composed, while Gibb fruitlessly tried to find a significant shot. With no subtlety to his offense, Gibb bull-rushed his way into the pocket and threw a wild right straight that was easily parried by Paul. Finding himself in a no-man's land, Gibb remained in his defensive crouch, but failed to tuck up behind his high guard properly. In response, Paul countered with a swift right hook that broke the guard of Gibb and knocked him down momentarily. While difficult to spot in this video, Gib had his eyes closed on the point of impact. Gib's inability to overcome his natural bracing instinct once again highlights his layman pedigree. What may come as a bit of a shock after the criticism raised, but Gib can actually counterpunch. Despite being stunned by the first knockdown, Gib refused to let up his pressure tactics and remained moving forward. When Paul threw a speculative straight right, Gib was able to catch the shot on his guard and roll with the punch to take out the sting. While Paul lingered in the pocket, Gib was then able to tag Paul with a short right hook that forced his opponent to dash away. A minor exchange in the grand scheme of things, but it serves to highlight the potential success Gib could have achieved if he had persisted with Riley's strategy. Instead, Gib attempted to cash in on his success with a wild barrage of hooks while chasing Paul in a straight line. As Gib kept his head firmly on the centre line, Paul was able to move backwards at an angle and open up with a left hook on Gib's extended chin. Crisp footwork and a slick counterpunch by Paul, yet this shot only transpired because of the ungainly and wild advance of Gib. After suffering 2 knockdowns, Gib fought the remainder of the fight devoid of confidence. Unwilling to press forward, Gib stood flat-footed and attempted to limit the damage he received. Unfortunately for Gib, Paul had finally found his range and was able to tee off with regular 1-2s. After hitting Gib with a double right hook, Paul showed true killer instinct. Separating himself from Gib's desperate clinch, Paul created the necessary space to land a powerful straight right that knocked Gib down for the 3rd and final time. Although Gib was never fully knocked out, the referee was forced to intervene based on the pre-fight 3 knockdown rule being in effect. Criticism was rife following the fight. The Independent termed the fight pantomime against professional, Forbes saw the bout as an insignificant breadcrumb, and countless tweets online viciously berated Gib for his nightmare performance. On the night, Gib did indeed fall apart, there is no denying that. To say Gib cannot box well is correct. To say Gib cannot box at all, however, is false. Gib employed a clear strategy and attempted to use mechanics to achieve his goal. To fight on such a massive scale undoubtedly played a factor in Gib's inability to tie together all the facets of his game and box competently. Jake Paul vs AnEsonGib marks yet another milestone for the rapidly growing future of celebrity fighting. While Gib may no longer take up the gloves again after the viral spanking he received, Jake Paul has a future in the sport, lined up to fight ex-basketballer Nate Robinson on the Mike Tyson vs Roy Jones Jr. undercard. Paul should have far too much class at this lowly level. There is no doubt that Paul will earn himself a few more ridiculously lucrative paydays if he continues boxing other celebrities. What is intriguing is whether he would ever consider transitioning into a fully-fledged professional. Before the pitchforks are raised, this isn't a discourse regarding world title contention. Rather, Paul has obvious athletic ability and so far has looked at home in the boxing ring. With extremely favourable matchmaking, Paul could embark on a career similar to Kiwi rugby legend Sonny Bill Williams. Boxing is evolving, and we must choose to jump ship or stay for the ride, whether we like it or not.